Morning, dear students. I hope you all are doing fine. I am Dr. Parvez Anwar Khan from Department of Microbiology, Jawaharlal Nehru Medical College, Aligarh. And today I am going to talk about the family Rickettsiaceae. Now, this family Rickettsiaceae comprise of the pathogens which basically form a group of microorganisms that are phylogenetically placed between bacteria and viruses. So actually they have got some features of bacteria and some features of viruses. Like for example, their size. Their size is a little bit smaller than the normal bacteria and larger than the viruses. Then their growth patterns. They do not grow in the ordinary culture media and they are obligate intracellular parasites. Then second important thing about these pathogens is that they are transmitted by vectors like tick, flea, louse and mite. So these will be our learning objectives. First of all, I will be discussing the microbiological aspects of the rickettsial organisms. Then I'll be talking about the rickettsial infections. There are various groups of infections in which we study rickettsia. So I'll be talking about them. Then the laboratory diagnosis of rickettsial infections. And finally the prevention and treatment. Okay, so the family Rickettsiaceae, it belongs to the order Rickettsias and it has got various genus. The important genus in this family are Rickettsia and Orientia. And then these genus have got several species like Rickettsia contains the species Rickettsia provazekii, Rickettsia typhi, Rickettsia rickettsii and others. And Orientia has got only one species that cause diseases in humans, that is Orientia sutsugamushi. Then I have also mentioned here Coxiella. This Coxiella was previously placed in the family Rickettsiaceae, but now it has been removed. I am mentioning it here because in some of the older articles or older books you might find it mentioned along with the family Rickettsiaceae. So I'll be discussing mainly about the genus Rickettsia and Orientia in this lecture. Okay, so talking about Howard Taylor Ricketts. The most of the pioneering work of on rickettsia was done by this pathologist. He was basically an American pathologist who worked on the rickettsial pathogens, and it is from his name, that is Howard Taylor Ricketts, that we have got the name of the family, name of the order Rickettsiales, the family Rickettsiaceae, the genus Rickettsia, and the species Rickettsii. So all of these things are named after him. So he worked with the rickettsial pathogens and finally he succumbed to death by acquiring one of the rickettsial pathogen. So most of the work was done by him on the rickettsial pathogens. Okay, so talking about the family Rickettsia. Okay, so talking about the general feature of these pathogens. First of all, they are small obligate intracellular parasite. So even when they cause infection, these pathogens reside inside the cell. Then classically they are called as gram-negative bacteria, but that is because of the fact that they stain poorly with gram stains. So obviously they will be called as gram-negative bacteria. The better stains used to stain this pathogen are Giemsa, Gimenez and Machiavello stain. So when we will be discussing laboratory diagnosis, these are the stains which we are going to use to stain this pathogen. Then the reservoir of this infection or this pathogen are the animals, insects and humans. But for the infection to get transmitted from animal to humans or from human to human, an insect vector is needed. The arthropods vectors could be lice, flea or mite. Now they possess a trilaminar cytoplasmic membrane and a cell wall of a bacterial type. So a bacterial cell wall, as we know that it has got two membranes, that is outer membrane and inner membrane, and between them there is a thin wall of peptidoglycans. So they have got a bacterial type of cell wall. Unlike viruses, they possess both DNA and RNA. Then they do not grow on the ordinary culture media. So here you can see a picture of a cell. Inside them you can see small sized gram-negative bacteria present. The size of this bacteria is around 0.25 micrometer, and they are pleomorphic. That means they could be present in the form of cocci, a bacilli, or some thread-like structures. Okay, so now we have talked about the taxonomy and the general features of the rickettsial pathogens. Now the infections caused by these pathogens are divided into various groups. So talking about the rickettsial infections classification, there are basically three groups that are typhus fever group, spotted fever group, and scrub typhus. The spotted fever group contains three types of diseases, that is epidemic typhus, Brill-Zinsser's typhus, and endemic typhus. Spotted fever group contains Rocky Mountain spotted fever, rickettsial pox, Indian tick typhus, and there are some other rickettsial diseases. Then scrub typhus contains one disease, that is scrub typhus caused by Orientia Sutsugumushi. So I'll be discussing these uh, fever groups in detail in the coming slides. Now talking about the antigenic structure. First of all, they have got a group specific alkali stable antigen, and this antigen is nothing but the lipopolysaccharide. So as we know that the lipopolysaccharides are present in all the gram negative bacteria. So in this bacteria, this alkali stable antigen forms the group specific. Why it is called the group specific? Because this will be present in all the groups of a certain infection type. Then we have a species specific antigen. A species specific antigen is present in a particular species, like Rickettsia rickettsii will have one type of species specific antigen, Rickettsia prowazekii will have another type of species specific antigen, and they are the outer membrane protein A and outer membrane protein B. Then apart from these, they have also got endotoxins and hemolysins. Okay, now talking about the pathogenesis of this disease. Now, pathogenesis of mainly all these pathogens is similar. Mainly the pathogenesis is that they are, first of all, they are transmitted by the feces or bite of the infected arthropod vector. They multiply at the site and enter the bloodstream. Once they enter the bloodstream, they go and invade the endothelial cells and they multiply inside the endothelial cells. So here you can see an endothelial cell and inside it the rickettsial organisms. Now talking about the pathogenesis some more. So first of all, what is happening? Here you can see the bacteria that is coming and attaching to the endothelial cells. Now after the attachment, the microorganism is endocytosed. So it goes inside the endothelial cell. Inside the endothelial cell, normally what should happen? It should have been got killed with the fusion of the lysosome and the phagosome. But what happens? It has got some chemicals like phospholipase D and hemolysin C. So these chemicals or mediators, they help in the escape from killing. Now they escape the phagoligosome and they come inside the cytoplasm of the endothelial cell. Inside the cell they multiply, and after the multiplication they are released into the bloodstream to go and infect the other cells. Now this release is very important because it is specific for specific pathogens. Like here you can see in Orientia, the release is in the form of the budding cells, while in the spotted fever group, there is focal lysis of the membrane, while in the typhus fever group there is complete cell lysis. So what will happen? This bacteria will go and attack some other cells. Apart from that, there will be localized inflammation of the endothelial cell, and that will result into the recruitment of the polymorphs. Then because of the damage, there will be leakage of the blood from the vessel to the interstitial space. Now, because of this leakage of the blood, there will be the consequent edema in the interstitial space. There will be loss of blood volume, and because of this loss of blood volume, there will be decreased osmotic pressure and there will be hypotension. Then because of the loss of the blood, the proteins present in the blood will also be lost, and that will be leading to the hypoalbuminemia. And finally, there will be necrosis of the distal part of the organ to which the blood is supplied. So mainly there will be the endothelial inflammation resulting into the vasculitis and these features. Now this I have already talked about the replication of the rickettsial pathogen inside the endothelial cell and the escape from the phagolygosome multiplication inside the cytoplasm, and then coming out of the cytoplasm by cell lysis, focal lysis or budding. Okay, so talking about the typhus fever group. So the first member of this group is epidemic typhus, that is also called as classical typhus, also called as Laus-borne typhus. So all these are the alternate name of this disease. The causative agent is Rickettsia prowazekii. Now here I would like to tell you a phrase or just a trick to remember the facts related to the epidemic typhus. Just remember a phrase: if you provoke a louse, it will cause epidemic. So if you provoke will remind you of prowazekii. Louse means Laus-borne typhus. The vector in this case is Laus-borne, and it will cause epidemic. That means it is associated with epidemic typhus. So you will be able to recall the three important facts related to the epidemic typhus. Now the vector here is the human body louse, also called as Pediculus humanus corporis or human head louse. Incubation period is around 5 to 21 days. Now how this infection is acquired, it is very interesting. Basically what happens that when an infected lice comes and infests an individual or a human being, what will happen? It will bite the area of infestation and it will defecate at that place. So because of the biting there will be itch. So the person who is infested will scratch that region, and when the person scratches there will occur the micro abrasions. Now because the feces of this lice are also present in that region, there will be the auto inoculation of the organism present in the feces in that human being, and this is how this infection is acquired. The mortality rate in this case is around 20 to 30% if it is left untreated. Symptoms are mainly non-specific for this disease, and it will be associated with severe headaches, chills, generalized myalgia, high fever, vomiting and macular rash that presents after 4 to 7 days, first on the trunk and then it spreads to the limb. An important point to note here is that it does not involve the palms and soles. So there is a basic importance about the rashes on palms and soles. So I'll be talking about this later on. And then if the central nervous system is involved, there will be the lack of consciousness. Okay, so coming on to the second infection of the typhus fever group, that is Brill-Zinsser's typhus. That is also called as recrudescent typhus. So this recrudescent typhus, as the name suggests, it It is nothing but the reactivation of the primary Rickettsia prowazekii infection. So actually what happens, suppose a person got infected with Rickettsia prowazekii. So what will happen? The patient will develop the epidemic typhus. Now after the treatment or after some time, naturally the person gets cured of this disease. But what happens, actually he is not cured of that infection. This Rickettsia prowazekii organism go and hide inside the reticuloendothelial cells, and they remain latent there for months and years. Now what happens after some years? This Rickettsia prowazekii will get reactivated, and now this disease will be called as Brill-Zinsser's typhus or recrudescent typhus. Obviously the pathogen responsible will be the same, that is Rickettsia prowazekii. Then this reactivation disease will have mild signs and symptoms as compared to the epidemic typhus. Second important thing here is, if you want to diagnose recrudescent typhus, you will not get IgM. Why? Because IgM are produced in the acute infection, while this is the reactivation disease. So you will only find IgGs in this type of infection. So please take a note of this when we discuss laboratory diagnosis of these diseases. Okay, now the third member of the typhus fever group is the endemic typhus, also called as murine typhus. The organism responsible for this is Rickettsia typhi, and the vector is rat flea. The reservoir is rat, and the infection occurs after the rat flea bite, that is auto-inoculated with the feces of rat flea contaminated with Rickettsia typhi. Presentation, again, it is similar to the epidemic typhus. Pathogenesis is also similar to the epidemic typhus. So now we have talked about the typhus fever group. Coming on to the spotted fever group. Now the most important member of this group is the Rocky Mountain spotted fever, also called as RMSF, that is caused by Rickettsia rickettsii. Then we have rickettsial pox caused by Rickettsia akari, and Indian tick typhus caused by Rickettsia conuri. Then there are some other tick typhus diseases. Now coming on to the first member of the spotted fever group, that is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It is transmitted by Ixorid tick. Now these Ixorid tick are the Rocky Mountain wood tick, also called as Dermacentor andersoni. Now this Dermacentor is a genus of ticks in the family Ixodiae, that is also called as hard ticks. Rickettsial pox, the causative agent is Rickettsia akari, and the transmitting vector is mite. Again, in the case of Indian tick typhus, the causative agent is Rickettsia conuri, and the vector is hard tick or Ixorid tick. Now talking about the Rocky Mountain spotted fever, this is the most serious form of the spotted fever group of diseases. Causative agent is Rickettsia rickettsii, and infection occurs after tick bite. So here point to remember is, just by the tick bite this infection gets transmitted. The importance of feces of the vector is not seen in this type of infection. So these pathogens are present in the salivary glands of the vector, and they get inoculated in the at the site of the wound. The incubation period is around 1 week. It is more similar to the typhus fever, but the rash appears earlier and is more prominent. So most of the features are just like the typhus fever group, but the rash is more prominent. Second important point is that rashes will be present on palms and soles. Now why I am mentioning here specifically palms and soles? Because there is an importance of the presence of rashes on palms and soles. So if you know or if you see in a patient that there are rashes present on palms and soles, you are left with a very short list of differential diagnosis. So there are very few conditions in which you see rashes on palms and soles. A mnemonic to remember the conditions is CARS, that is CARS. CA is for Coxsackie A virus infection that causes hand, foot and mouth disease and herpangina. Then rickettsia infection that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Then the secondary syphilis. So in all these three conditions you see rashes on the palms and soles. Now here you can see some pictures in which you can see the clinical presentation in the form of the rashes present over the body and on the palms and feet of the patients suffering from the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Here again you can see some pictures, the macular rash on the sole of the feet and the petechial rash in the forearm and the arm. Again some pictures of the rashes present in Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Now here is a picture which is very interesting. Just visualize this picture and remember what are the important things here. So this will simply remind you of the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So just you can see that here is a patient or a person who is standing with the palm facing towards you, and there is a mountain in the background that is spotted. So you can see a spotted mountain. Then you can see rashes that are present on the palms and soles, and there is a tick on the body. So this will remind you of the causative agent or the vector of this disease, that is tick in the case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And then patient is having fever and headache. So this is an important picture which will remind you of the features related to the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Okay, now the second member of the spotted fever group, that is rickettsial pox. So as the name suggests, the rashes will be like pox or papillovesicular, unlike the maculopapular rash seen in the other rickettsial disease. The signs and symptoms, again, they are non-specific and just like any other rickettsial diseases like fevers, chills, headache, malaise and myalgia. And recovery often occurs after 10 to 14 days. The causative agent is Rickettsia akari and the vector is mite. Now lastly, the third member of the scrub of this fever group is scrub typhus. The species responsible for this disease is Orientia sutsugamushi. Basically, it is a Japanese term, and in Japanese, sutsuga means small and dangerous, and mushi are creature. Mushi means creature. So these are the small and dangerous creature called in Japanese. The vector is trombiculid mite, also called as chigger. Reservoir are rodents. So basically what happens in scrub typhus is 2 to 3 weeks after the chigger bite, the person will suffer from headache, chills, fever, conjunctivitis and even deafness. And there is a characteristic eschar or a black colored lesion present at the site of the chigger bite. There will be splenomegaly and enlargement of the lymph nodes, and then the person suffers from a maculopapular rash appearing on the trunk which later becomes generalized. The case fatality rate is around 10 to 60% in this case. Now talking about the complication of rickettsial diseases. First is the bronchopneumonia. So a person suffering from the rickettsial diseases along with the non-specific signs and symptoms, as a complication person might develop bronchopneumonia. Because of the blood loss, there will be increased workload on the heart and the person might suffer congestive heart failure. There can be multi-organ failure. There can be deafness, disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, myocarditis, endocarditis or glomerulonephritis. Okay, so now I have discussed the basic microbiological aspects of the rickettsial pathogens, and I talked about the classification of the rickettsial infections, which included the rickettsial typhus group, the spotted fever group, and the scrub typhus. So the important points to remember here is the respective diseases in the fever groups, their vector and their causative agents. Now, apart from these fever groups, there are also some new or re-emerging rickettsiosis, and mainly they are the Tibola or tick-borne lymphadenopathy. So TI for tick, BO for borne, and LA for lymphadenopathy. So Tibola. Then we have Debonel, that is derma center borne. Derma center is the vector of this disease. Derma center borne necrosis, eschar, and lymphadenopathy, that is caused by Rickettsia slovaka infection. So both this Tibola and Debonel are caused by Rickettsia slovaka infection. Okay, so now coming on to the laboratory diagnosis of this disease. So basic strategy which we can employ to diagnose this condition is, first of all, we will need the specimen. So specimen could be in the form of the biopsy of the skin lesions because there is the presence of rash. So you can take the skin biopsy. Then we can take the blood sample. Because this pathogen is present inside the blood, we can detect the pathogen inside the blood sample, or if we want to detect the antibodies, we will require the blood sample. Now this blood sample could be used for the guinea pig inoculation. As I've already told that these rickettsial organisms do not grow on the ordinary culture media. So you need the techniques which are used for the viral culture like guinea pig inoculation, tissue culture inoculation, and embryonated egg inoculation of yolk sac. Then in this blood we can also detect the antibody by serological techniques. So moving on to again in the details of the laboratory diagnosis. First of all, before going to the laboratory diagnosis, a proper history is very important in this case because that will give you a clue that the patient might be suffering from rickettsial diseases. And most of the time there will be a history of insect bite. The patient will tell that he or she got bitten by some insect, so there will be the history of insect bite. Secondly, this is also very important, the patient will be living in the endemic region. So if a patient is living in the endemic region, you have to think about the rickettsial diseases. So in India there are very few endemic regions, mainly these are the hilly regions of the Kashmir and Himachal Pradesh. So in those regions we see the rickettsial diseases. Okay, so the presumptive laboratory diagnosis is based on the finding of rickettsial-like organism in the tissue or blood. So in blood you will not mainly find this pathogen. This tissue is important. You can take the biopsy of the skin lesions and stain with Machiavello, Castaneda or Giemsa stain. As I've already told, they do not take the Gram stain. So the histopathological stains could be used to stain the skin biopsy and to visualize these organisms. Then immunofluorescent antibody techniques could also be used to visualize this organism. Here you can see the Gimenez stained cell inside which you can see the small pink colored rickettsial organisms. This is the Giemsa stain which is visualizing the rickettsia present inside the cells. This is immunofluorescent. So here you can see the green colored fluorescent organisms, and basically this is the more sensitive method to visualize the pathogen present in the skin biopsies. Then the detection of antibodies in the blood. We have got various techniques by which we do the serological test, or we detect the antibodies inside the blood of the patient. First is the Weil-Felix reaction, then the complement fixation reaction or test, latex agglutination test, and enzyme immunoassay. So nowadays the most important method to demonstrate the presence of antibody is enzyme immunoassay. Weil-Felix reaction, it was previously used and it is still used in the underdeveloped or developing countries, but this test is not very much specific or sensitive for diagnosing rickettsial infection. But still we have to talk about the Weil-Felix reaction, because in India we still use this Weil-Felix reaction to diagnose rickettsial infection. So first of all, what this test does, this test detects the antibodies or agglutinins against the rickettsial antigens. But here I have mentioned the Proteus strains. Proteus strains because in this test we use the antigens which are derived from the Proteus vulgaris and Proteus mirabilis strains. The strains of Proteus vulgaris is OX19. So OX here means, normally when we describe the antigenic formula of a bacteria, we say that it is OH. O stands for somatic antigen and H stands for fimbrial antigen. So here we see OX, that means H is missing. In the place of H we have X, that means this will be a non-motile strain of Proteus vulgaris and a non-motile strain of Proteus mirabilis. Now we are using the antigens of Proteus to detect the antibodies against rickettsial infection. This is because of the fact, because these Proteus antigens are the heterophile antigen. Heterophile antigen means they cross react with the antibodies that are produced against the rickettsia. So we use these antigens because it is easy to culture Proteus vulgaris and Proteus mirabilis. And the basic antigen that is responsible for detection of the antibodies is the group specific lipopolysaccharide. So here is the interpretation of the Weil-Felix reaction. Here you can see that in epidemic typhus the OX19 is positive, OX2 is plus or minus, and OXK is minus. Similarly, we interpret the result of the Weil-Felix reaction and decide whether the patient is suffering from epidemic typhus, endemic typhus, scrub typhus, or other mentioned rickettsial diseases. Now this test is not very specific because we are using Proteus antigens. Obviously, if the person has got some systemic infection of Proteus, that person will also be having the Proteus antibodies and it will cross react. So it can give an impression or a false positive test for rickettsial diseases. Here you can see the microtiter plate in which the Weil-Felix reaction is set. So in the first row we can see the OXK antigen, in the second row that is OX2 antigen, and in the third row we can see the OX19 antigen. Then there are various dilutions of this antigens used in order to comment upon the titer of the antibodies. Then most important techniques nowadays is the enzyme linked immunosorbent assay for the detection of antibodies or antigen of rickettsia. So nowadays we use ELISA. This is the most important test that is used in the laboratories. Then we can also use the polymerase chain reaction in order to diagnose this condition. So here in polymerase chain reaction, what we do, we detect the gene of the rickettsial pathogen. Then we have another test called as Neal-Moser reaction associated with the diagnosis of rickettsial diseases. But nowadays this test is hardly utilized in laboratory because it involves the use of animals, and because of the strict animal protection guidelines this test is mostly abandoned. But still you have to know about this test. Here what we do, we take a male guinea pig and it is inoculated intraperitoneally with the blood of the patients suspected of having rickettsial disease. Now, after the inoculation, what will happen? There will be the presence or appearance of fever, scrotal swelling, enlargement of testes, and these enlarged testes will not be able to be pushed back inside the inguinal canal due to the inflammation and adhesion between the layers of tunica vaginalis. So if this happens, it will be called as a positive test. A positive test or a positive Neal-Moser reaction will be seen in the case of Rickettsia rickettsii infection, and negative will be seen in the cases of Rickettsia prowazekii infection. Now again a word about the isolation or the culture of this pathogen. This cannot be cultured on the ordinary culture media, as I have already told. So the techniques which could be utilized for isolation or culturing this organism is the guinea pig inoculation, the tissue culture inoculation, and the embryonated egg inoculation. Important cell lines which are used to culture rickettsia are the tick cell lines, fibroblast cell lines, HeLa cell lines, and Detroit 6. When we use the embryonated egg for the inoculation or culture of this pathogen, we inoculate the specimen in the yolk sac of the embryonated egg. Okay, so lastly, talking about the prevention and treatment of this disease. So first of all, because we know this disease is transmitted by a vector, so the control of vector is very important for the control of this disease, and for this we will be utilize the insecticides. So, and secondly, the vaccines. Although there are some vaccines available for epidemic typhus and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but the protection level provided by these vaccines vary a lot. So practically these are only recommended for those persons who are living in endemic regions. More about the insecticides and the control of vector will be taught to you in your preventive and social medicine classes. Now talking about the treatment, the main drugs which are used for the treatment of this disease is doxycycline and tetracycline. So these are the two drugs which are used for the treatment of the rickettsial diseases. So this was all about the rickettsial diseases. Thank you.